Ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for the short delay, but I want to say that it is a privilege to open this timely conference on doing business in the Arctic, held only a few weeks before the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in Reykjavik, thus serving as an input into the discussions there, not the least by highlighting that the Arctic is about the people living in the area and their livelihoods. Economic development and sustainable use of resources in their interest is what today's conference is all about. The Arctic is vast, and for a long time, for the most part, it was out of mind, out of sight. Climate change and important and scarce resources put the Arctic back on the map. Still, the Arctic means different things to different people and countries. But the important issue is that it is home to 4 million people. Focusing on the Arctic puts climate change, security interests of superpowers, new shipping routes, resource utilization at the forefront, as listed in the thorough and thought-provoking as well as informative report by former Minister Össur Skarphéðinsson, who will be speaking shortly. But our focus here today is not on global warming and the ever-accelerating melting of the glaciers. Our focus is rather on the opportunities in the Arctic, some of which are even emerging with the declining ice, the new shipping routes and all that comes with them. Opportunities which will provide a sustainable livelihood for the people living in the Arctic, ensuring economic growth, bringing with it new jobs, making the Arctic a place where young people want to live, turning the trend of young people leaving because of lack of jobs or not returning after finishing their education elsewhere because of lack of opportunities. During Iceland's chairmanship of the Arctic Council, this has been a constant focus, and I know my colleague, Ambassador Einar Gunnarsson, will go over the highlights of the last 2 years, very busy lives in his life, and in his input shortly. Iceland is looking at ways of enhancing our cooperation in a vast number of areas with Greenland, but we here at the Embassy in Washington are exploring ways of increasing trade and economic relations, including investments with the Arctic state of Alaska, and I do dare to say near Arctic state of Maine. Maine is playing a key role in the shipping route and closer ties between the US, Greenland and Iceland, and we are eyeing opportunities in Alaska as well. We have already established good ties in both states. I could also look at our friends in the state of Washington, an important partner for Iceland. I do look forward to hearing from all the great speakers lined up here today, and I will now turn the floor to my great colleague, Einar Gunnarsson, who has been serving or running the show of the Arctic Council for the last 2 years. Einar, please, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to have been asked to address you here today at this conference on doing business in the Arctic, organized by the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce in New York, along with other partners involved. As most of you might know, Iceland has chaired the Arctic Council for the past 2 years now, since we took over the chairmanship from Finland in 2019 after their successful chairmanship period. I have had the privilege to chair this group of the senior Arctic officials that run the business of the Arctic Council between its biannual ministerial meetings. Our term is now coming to an end, and we are getting ready to hand the gavel over to Russia at the upcoming ministerial meeting in Reykjavik at the end of this month. The ministerial will be attended by the foreign ministers of the Arctic states, including the foreign ministers of Greenland and the Faroe Islands as parts of the delegation of the Kingdom of Denmark, and by the 6 permanent participants representing the indigenous people of the Arctic. Due to circumstances that we are all much too familiar with, ministers and permanent participants will be attending with the smallest possible delegations, while others, like the observers, will join us through an online platform. At the start of Iceland's chairmanship in 2019, we couldn't have imagined a pandemic to strike halfway through our chairmanship, affecting not only our planned activities, projects, and meetings, but the rest of the world as well. It almost sounds like something from a blockbuster movie, but not the real world. However, it has been our reality for the past 60 months, and we have had to adapt and learn to live our lives in a new world with restrictions and face masks. Nevertheless, with a promising vaccination program in progress in most places, we can allow ourselves to be optimistic for the future. As you can imagine, it has been both a strange and a challenging time to be in the chairmanship seat of the Arctic Council. I have to say, though, that despite the challenges that COVID-19 has brought about, we can be proud of what we have achieved during our chairmanship period. We were able to continue our substantial program in a relatively unimpeded manner, and we also quickly compiled a briefing document on the effects of COVID-19 on the Arctic societies. Furthermore, the pandemic gave us an unexpected opportunity to develop the work of the Arctic Council. Our working groups had for many years been using virtual platforms to advance their work, but the meetings of the senior Arctic officials had always been held in person, which meant they only met a couple of times per year and required long-distance traveling for most participants. That has all changed now, and I have been convening the senior Arctic officials almost every week during this winter, and even more frequently over the last couple of months in the run-up to the ministerial meeting. We on the Icelandic chairmanship team have found ways to adapt all of our plans to the new virtual reality, and as an example, were able to successfully convert the International Symposium on Plastics in the Arctic and the Subarctic region into a successful online event. Action on plastic pollution in the Arctic marine environment is one of our key chairmanship priorities, and it was therefore of great importance to have leading scientists and experts in the field together to discuss and share their knowledge and important research on plastics in the ocean. During our chairmanship, we have focused heavily on the Arctic marine environment. We Icelanders have of course relied on the ocean for our livelihoods for centuries, and fisheries and other ocean-based activities continue to be of vital interest for us. The same goes for our neighbors, as the Arctic region is largely covered by ocean. We have all witnessed the changes in the Arctic marine environment due to climate change. The Arctic Council working groups have contributed significantly to scientific knowledge and understanding of the Arctic marine environment. During Iceland's chairmanship of the Arctic Council, we have built on previous work of the Council in these matters. We launched a new platform for discussing Arctic marine environment issues called the Senior Arctic Officials Marine Mechanism, or the SMM. It is our hope that the SMM becomes an annual gathering of the senior Arctic officials with marine leaders, scientists, and experts, and that it will strengthen circumpolar marine stewardship. An interesting angle for this audience is perhaps our focus on the blue bioeconomy. By that, I'm referring to the use of innovation and biotechnology to improve the utilization levels and product value of our harvests of living marine resources. The average utilization levels worldwide is around 50%, while in Iceland and in other highly developed countries, it may get close to 70%. Those at the forefront of the blue bioeconomy aspire to reach 100% utilization levels and are often able to multiply the overall value of their products. Iceland can lead by example here, as we have companies that have managed to all but eliminate biomass waste stemming from their harvests of living marine resources. From what previously was considered as waste, they are now producing high-value ingredients for various products, like pharmaceuticals and skin healing materials, to name only a couple of examples. But the Arctic marine environment has not been Iceland's only priority during our chairmanship. The Ottawa Declaration that established the Arctic Council places sustainable development at its core. Sustainability is also the backbone of Iceland's governance. That is why we built our chairmanship priorities around striking a balance between economic, social, and environmental sustainability under the heading Together Towards a Sustainable Arctic. Throughout our chairmanship, we have also highlighted climate and green energy solutions, people and communities of the Arctic, and last but not least, a stronger Arctic Council. As our chairmanship comes to an end, I can truly say that despite the challenges brought about by the pandemic, we have managed to fulfill most of the objectives we set out with in the beginning. That is an achievement, considering the circumstances we had to work with. We would, of course, have liked to host more of our planned events and meetings in person and on-site, but however, most of our chairmanship projects are on track, and the few that were delayed, we will leave in the capable hands of the incoming Russian chairmanship. As we approach the ministerial meeting, we now look firmly on track to deliver a strong ministerial declaration and the first ever strategic plan for the Arctic Council. That will be a worthy accomplishment on the eve of the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council. Dear friends, I believe that cooperation and collaboration of the Arctic state is paramount for the future of the region. Despite international tension and stress, we have managed to keep the Arctic peaceful and stable, using the Arctic Council as a platform to work together. Climate change is a serious threat to the Arctic, but it also means that the region is more accessible than ever. We must find ways to develop our societies and economies in the Arctic while protecting the environment at the same time. That is sustainable development. We must keep sustainability at the forefront of everything we do so future generations may prosper and thrive in the Arctic region. Thank you.
Good morning. The 10 points I will be making to you in the next 8 minutes are some of the key findings or suggestions of a new report on Iceland's economic interests in the Arctic. The report was commissioned by the Icelandic Minister of Foreign Affairs. The findings of this report are based on discussions with Icelandic public companies, Icelandic embassies abroad, private businesses, educational and government institutions. We created a task list of how Iceland could prepare in order to benefit from economic opportunities that we believe are relevant for Iceland as a peaceful and proud member of the Arctic community. The outcome of this Icelandic report is introduced in 10 main chapters, with in all over 50 proposals that need to be addressed concerning Icelandic economic interests in the Arctic. As mentioned, many of the issues in the report concern Icelandic infrastructure and local interests. So as you see here, I have taken 10 points or ideas out of the report that I think are also relevant for other partners in the region. So let's start with point number 1. The Icelandic experience is that working directly with regional governments can be very fruitful for both sides. We see this in our expanding business relationships with Maine in the west and Murmansk in the east. So, a win-win outcome when we focus on bilateral cooperation with certain regions and also for regional governments to work together. This means a need for more systematic approach and focus for the embassies or other businesses serviced in other countries. We do believe this is a very important idea that needs to be further addressed. Secondly, importance of strengthening the Arctic Economic Council. The Icelandic business community is very interested in working with the AEC. It is an area where Iceland believes we can be of assistance with our experience and innovative ideas. Still, the Icelandic business experience seems to be that we need to find better ways of making the canals more direct from each business to AEC, as well as having AEC with stronger canals in the governing bodies of the Arctic Council. Free trade agreements and other agreements have an important role in ensuring foreign trade interests, such as air transport agreements. The report highlights the value such agreements could bring, for example, between Iceland and Greenland. We emphasize the importance of updating the free trade agreement with Canada, and also that Iceland continues to work with the US on ensuring trade interests. Well thought out trade agreements between close allies provide an important framework to not only manage and strengthen trade, but also reinforce broader areas of cooperation and shared values. Number 4, as you know, the Arctic Circle is the largest network of international dialogue and cooperation on the future of the Arctic. This is a unique venue where political leaders, scientists, environmentalists, students, business leaders come together. The Circle. The business community should utilize this platform. Logistics, providing goods, is the artery of all communities in the Arctic. Royal Greenland and Eimskip cooperation is a good example of a successful cooperation between Iceland and Greenland. And one of our suggestions to the Icelandic ministries is to create the necessary infrastructure, harbors, airports, roads, for Iceland to be a transport and logistics center in the Arctic. This is a platform for further cooperation between countries. Then we must emphasize the need for stronger communication canals, satellite networks, fiber optics. This is the modern artery of business, and to improve living conditions. We need to do this properly, a coherent to-do list. We need to solve problems with short range of EGNOS and WAS in the Arctic regions. Need for joint effort on improvements. We must remember that social equality, gender imbalance, social problems may all be related to the lack of communication canals. Iceland has expressed an interest in providing search and rescue services in the Arctic region and becoming a center for search and rescue in the area. We are fully aware that the area of the Arctic is vast, so several such centers will be needed. We already keep rescue equipment from Denmark concerning Greenland rescue at our Keflavik airport area, and we can provide other countries with the same possibilities for storing equipment. Here, we focus on the importance of cooperation, a network of search and rescue stations, and creating systematic task lists between countries. This is hopefully something you can work on further. A coherent opportunity desk is another suggestion, that is to create a canal for further cooperation between the northern regions of each country. Here we are expressing the need for deeper business cooperation. We already have much know-how from each country, but we believe it can be better reported and distributed between partners in the Arctic. How do we better make this information understandable and reachable? Can we set up an opportunity desk as a common ground for the regions, focusing together on the Arctics? Number 9, the business community, both experienced businesses and startup companies, emphasized the importance of education and research institutions working more directly with businesses on innovation and startups. And finally, in our proposals to the Icelandic government, we suggested a stronger cooperation between Nordic countries towards tourism, introducing the Arctic destinations with a list of destinations that you must visit, sort of a bucket list for those interested. Of course, we respect our environment and need to focus on sustainable tourism. And let me remind you that we not only have ice in the Arctic, we can provide tourists with volcanic eruptions as well. My 8 minutes are up. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me. We have been having a bit of technical problems here. That's why I come a bit late to the event. My name is Pétur Ásgeirsson. I'm the Icelandic ambassador to Canada, and I greet you all from Ottawa in Canada. We have just heard Árni Sigfússon speak. Árni has been chairing a committee on business in the Arctic. He is the former mayor of Reykjavik and Keflavik. The next speaker we have is Össur Skarphéðinsson, former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Iceland. He will introduce the new report entitled Greenland and Iceland in the New Arctic. The report was written by the Greenland Committee appointed by the Foreign Affairs Minister Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson and recently published by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Iceland. Össur Skarphéðinsson served as chairman of the committee.
Ladies and gentlemen, presently a variety of business opportunities are emerging in Greenland. I want to highlight to you three fields. The first is tourism. 3 new international airports will start coming online early this decade. This will make Greenland a hotspot in Arctic tourism. At the same time, a lot of investments will be needed in hotels, not least in high-end and boutique hotels. With reduced sea ice, cruising will also rapidly increase. In 2018, more than half of all cruises under construction were built by the Polar Code with Arctic tours in mind. Indeed, visits of cruisers to Greenland rose by a phenomenal 90% between 2015 to 18. This decade, therefore, numerous business opportunities will emerge in tourism in Greenland. My second field is renewable energy. A few concrete examples. If Greenland is to fulfill her goal of 90% of energy needs being met by renewables by 2030, she has to get at least 2 medium-sized hydropower plants online this decade and 3 more in the next. We also have 50 or so villages on the coast, all using oil, that also will need micropower plants, either hydro, where the potential exists, or integrated solutions based on solar, wind, and large batteries. To add, future mining will be driven by renewable energy according to the policy of the Greenland government. This demands power plants with a range of capacities. When downstream production starts in Greenland, as the government intends, a lot of energy will also be needed for smelting. Globally, demand for new data centers is constantly increasing due to big data, artificial intelligence, and crypto mining based on blockchain. I predict we shall see the first data centers in Greenland this decade, and later high-speed interactive services will follow. In our age of rapid global energy transition, one of the silver bullets in transport will be hydrogen, but only hydrogen produced by renewable energy. Greenland is the ideal place to produce such material along with other synthetic fuels. And already, international companies are eyeing Greenland in this respect. The most exciting field, however, is mining of metals. Every single metal you can think of is found in Greenland. All are in mineable quantities, and as a spice you can add precious stones, as Greenland also boasts large reserves of red rubies, pink sapphires, and small diamonds. Mining in Greenland is made all the easier by the following facts. The deposits are usually very close to the sea, making transport of materials out and provisions and equipment in not too difficult. The minerals also usually lie close to the surface, and the concentration is often very high. Most importantly, the deposits are often unusually large. A few examples. The Golden Belt in South Greenland has concentration similar to Yukon in Alaska and the Witwatersrand in South Africa. In Dundas in the far north, one of the largest deposits of titanium lies in easily mineable sand dunes. In the remote Wegener Peninsula that few of you have heard of, north of Scoresby Sound, you have what is presumed to be the biggest copper reserves ever discovered. And in the sound itself, a mountain of molybdenum has been discovered. Greenland could also become one of the largest producers of uranium and is presently listed 5th to 10th in terms of reserves. Uranium is nevertheless controversial in Greenland, and only last month caused the collapse of the previous government. The new government, however, is quite well disposed to mining in general, apart, of course, from the uranium. And ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget Greenland's unique position with regard to the rare earth metals so much in demand in our times. They're not only vital for the ongoing energy transition, but increasingly important for military use, from night goggles to long-range missiles. China lists them as strategic metals and the EU and US as critical. The US actually produces next to nothing. It has to buy 78% of their needs from China. In case of dysprosium, 98%. Greenland, on the other hand, has 25% of the global reserves. This actually is one of the reasons why the superpowers consider Greenland to be the belle of the ball. In the mines of the future, all infrastructure will be built from scratch. Each will need a port, airfield, helipads, temporary housing for several hundred construction workers, sometimes thousands, quality accommodation for staff with offices, gyms, leisure centers, labs, healthcare centers, etc. A lot of construction will therefore be needed from companies with Arctic experience. All the services in the mines will be outsourced, from healthcare to helicopters to cleaning to chemical analysis. The government de facto offers a competitive advantage to service providers that are willing to join forces with the small domestic providers. To sum up, a lot of business opportunities are presently emerging in Greenland, and she is looking for international finance, and Greenland is open for business for everyone. Finally, a few words on geopolitics. In my mind, the US government made a huge mistake when it basically departed from the Arctic in the beginning of this century. It left an open field. If there is any single thing history has taught us, there is never a void in terms of geopolitics. And consequently, since 2010, in the absence of the US, Russia has constructed 6 new army bases in the Arctic. At the same time, China has become a major player in the Arctic, forming strong diplomatic and economic ties to the West Nordic nations, including 4 major mining concessions in Greenland. And as of today, China buys 13 times more sea produce from Greenland than the US. One of the big tasks of the Biden administration is therefore to formulate a new strategy on the Arctic nations. The strategy should not only focus on security, but on trade and investment, with special emphasis on Greenland. In the present climate, trade is a part of the international security fabric. A free trade agreement with each of the West Nordic countries would be a big positive step that doesn't cost the US a dime, but would strengthen ties in other fields, such as security. The opportunities to do business with Greenland and Iceland are rapidly increasing, as I have just described. The business communities in the US and Canada should examine them thoroughly and seize them. Because if they don't, very recent history shows that somebody else will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Össur, for your comments and indeed for your leadership in writing this important and most interesting report. I think before we go to the ministerial panel, I will go through my introductory comments here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this event. We have an outstanding attendance today. Not only are there people from over 20 countries, but reading through the list of attendees, it is clear that we have great many people who are dedicated to the preservation of the Arctic, but at the same time understand the need for sustainable use of its resources and a steady development of the quality of life for the inhabitants of the Arctic area. We will in the next 2 hours hear 3 presentations, well, we've already heard them, and listen to 2 panel discussions by some very interesting and important people. The challenge is, however, that we are going to do all this in a relatively short time, which explains why we have to be quite strict with the time allotted to each item on the agenda, and why we cannot allow any questions for the first 3 speakers. For the panel discussions, we do encourage questions in writing through the chat channel. The moderators of the panels will, as much as possible, allow time for these questions. Before we start, I would like to remind you that we do encourage virtual networking between the attendees, and that we will keep the platform open for 2 hours after the event for anyone to make use of that. Those who want to make themselves available are asked to stay logged on. It is now my pleasure to introduce the ministerial panel, a conversation between Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and the United States. Introducing the panel, I will of course start with my own minister, Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Development Cooperation. We then move on to our neighboring Greenland and welcome Pele Broberg, Minister for Industry, Trade, Foreign Affairs and Climate. From Canada, I would like to introduce Paula Isak, Associate Deputy Minister of Northern Affairs and President of the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. Unfortunately, Minister Van Dahl of Northern Affairs Canada could not be with us today. And last but not least, from the US State Department, James P. DeHart, US Coordinator for the Arctic region. The panel will be moderated by Mike Srega, Director of the Wilson Center's Polar Institute. Mike, I'm being told that you have 39 minutes, no less and no more. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we will do our very best to stay on time. And if we need to move quicker, I'm sure that Charles or someone will nudge us forward. Good morning, everyone. I am Mike Srega. I am the director of the Polar Institute, and it's a privilege to once again partner with our colleagues from Iceland to further discuss issues of growing importance to all Arctic nations, and increasingly, as just noted, nations beyond the Arctic region as well. And for today, we will further explore the unique opportunities and the interconnectedness between Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and the United States. And just to follow up on our first speaker's comments, I think one only needs to look at a map to understand that in the Arctic, relationships linked in an east-west or west-east orientation will only grow in importance, and I would argue are fundamentally important to shaping the future Arctic that we all would like to live and thrive in. And I am confident that this panel will now tease out many of the issues we just talked about, because these are important dialogues to have. And in my opinion, you cannot have economic development or thriving communities or a peaceful Arctic, as just noted, without political stability, because political uncertainty actually mutes economic development. So let's start with our panel. I will first ask Minister Thordarson to share his comments, and then after which we will follow the order as noted for 3 or 4 minutes for opening statements, and then I will come back in and we'll have a discussion among panelists. But as noted, we certainly want you to be not just listening to this discussion, but a part of the discussion. Mr. Foreign Minister, the virtual floor is yours.
Do you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Good morning. Oh, good. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. And I would like to start by thanking the organizers at the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce in New York, along with other partners involved in setting up this event on doing business in the Arctic. Also, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the speakers we just heard for their excellent and interesting contribution. Some of you might not be aware, but Össur is actually former foreign minister of Iceland. As you heard, Iceland has chaired the Arctic Council for the past 2 years now, and later this month will be handing the chairmanship gavel over to Russia at the ministerial meeting in Reykjavik. During our chairmanship, we have focused on the Arctic marine environment, climate, and green energy solutions, people and communities of the Arctic, and stronger Arctic Council. We believe that the key to a stronger Arctic Council is by enhancing the constructive cooperation that has been backbone of the Council from the beginning. As the Arctic gathers more interest globally, new opportunities have emerged. I would like to mention the blue bioeconomy here, which is a great example of economic development in the Arctic. It focuses on sustainable use of bioresources to improve utilization, innovation, and creating higher value products. The Ocean Cluster in Portland, Maine is also a good example of an innovative blue economy project and Arctic collaboration between Iceland and the US. However, we must make sure that sustainability lies at the heart of everything we do in the Arctic, and that scientific data, local knowledge, and traditional knowledge are used to build a better, more sustainable Arctic for future generations. I am certain that we will have a good and constructive conversation here today, and look forward to hearing from my colleagues and fellow Arctic enthusiasts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister, for your comments. We appreciate that. Now, our next speaker, Mr. Pelle Broberg, Minister of Industry, Trade, Foreign Affairs, and Climate from the Government of Greenland. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce for organizing this timely webinar and for inviting me to join this group of esteemed panelists. I would also like to thank Össur for his words just before. It was a pleasure to meet him here in Greenland last time he was here as well. I look forward to discuss how we can address and improve sustainable economic development and trade in the Arctic, both among ourselves as well as with the rest of the world. We are all Arctic countries and neighbors, and it's only logical that we should trade a lot more with each other than what is the reality today. We need to focus on addressing technical hindrances on cross-border trade and movement as for us here in Greenland. Status quo is not an option if we are to grow our economy and improve the living conditions for the people in Greenland. Our new government was confirmed less than 2 weeks ago, And as a minister responsible for Greenland's foreign affairs, trade, and industry, it is not a coincidence that those three sectors are now under one ministry, as they are closely linked, and we want to utilize the synergies that exist between those sectors. Overall, we need to maintain the Arctic as a zone of cooperation, stability, and low tension. This is the foundation for developing our economies, as well as to develop relations among each other in a stable and predictable way. Transparency, stability, and growth, both economically and socially, are priorities for the new government, as well as addressing climate change challenges and ensuring sustainable development. We wish to develop our industries, innovation, tourism, and job creation, all in a sustainable way. We also want to establish a think tank on business and trade to advise us on the necessary political steps we need to take in order to develop our industries and innovation. It is also our priority to increase our trade relations with other countries, including establishing free trade agreements with key partners. It is further a priority to increase cooperation and trade, in particular with the US, following the agreement we signed last October in the Common Plan for the US-Greenland cooperation and the sections dealing with the trade and investment. We have also welcomed with great interest the comprehensive report by the Icelandic Ministry of Foreign Affairs on steps to increase relations between Iceland and Greenland. We very much look forward to the Icelandic lead and to the further discussions on which priorities to focus on. We have already seen a proliferation on increased economic, trade, and business relations between our two countries. So I'm optimistic about what the future will bring in bringing us closer together. And further, I would like to congratulate Iceland on a very successful chairmanship of the Arctic Council, despite all the challenges during the pandemic. Good work. There has been comments that a report as the Iceland-Greenland report should be made with regard to Greenland-Canada relations. A great number of Canadian companies are active in Greenland when it comes to mining and fisheries. We share a number of fish species as well as marine mammals, which we cooperate on in management of these. We also have long-standing relations with our fellow Inuit in Nunavut. There are possibilities to explore in easing movements of goods and people that we could focus on. I promise you I'm almost done. The new government views the mineral industry as an opportunity to develop the economy. Mining is an important pillar of the future Greenlandic economy, as we have great potential, as Osho also stated, when it comes to the resources. But mining and other exploitation of natural resources should be conducted in a sustainable way. Though we see mining as an important future pillar for the future of Greenland, we do have one exception though, as this government don't support mining of uranium. This is solely from a human health and environmental perspective. It is important to stress that the government is focused on how to grow and develop our economy and businesses, including mining, and we are looking at our neighboring countries to do that. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. Let me just alert everyone that we're having some technical problems with a couple of our speakers. So Jim DeHart, if you're on, let's go just audio with you if you don't mind. I understand there's a problem with your video. Is that correct?
That's true, Mike. Thanks. Looks like I won't have video today, but happy to join here on audio.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So let me just reintroduce you. This is Mr. Jim DeHart, is the U.S. coordinator for the Arctic region in the United States Department of State. Jim, I'll turn the virtual floor over to you at this moment.
Okay, thanks very much. Great to be here, and I appreciate very much the invitation. I do want to express my admiration to Iceland for persevering through the pandemic with a successful Arctic Council chairmanship. Mr. Minister, Secretary Blinken, very much looking forward to attending the ministerial that's coming up in a few weeks, very important event. So we are all looking forward to that. So I think I would just say, first of all, appreciate and welcome the focus on this part of the Arctic region, because I think it's useful from time to time to step back and recognize that there's more than one Arctic, and to give attention to the parts of the Arctic sometimes that are more remote, more challenged in terms of a lack of infrastructure, basic services, and challenged by distance. And so we have a special place in our policy for the North American Arctic. And there we, along with Alaska and Canadian Arctic, we think of Greenland, and of course Iceland, extremely important to this conversation. And, you know, because I think the conditions of life and the circumstances in a city like Tromsø are quite different from the circumstances facing residents in Barrow or Iqaluit or Sisimiut or Husavik, which, by the way, I think is a town worth singing about. You know, I think the people living in these parts of the Arctic have a lot in common, share a lot of the same considerations and the same challenges, and the connections that we can help to make among these communities are immensely important. And I think, you know, and it is its own context when we think about how to incentivize business and investment in this part of the Arctic, which we want to do, and we want to make sure that our policies are geared towards incentivizing investment. As we do so, we take into account a few considerations. One is the need for high standards and transparency and sustainable approaches, and approaches that are linked to the best interests and the welfare of the communities that are most closely impacted, affected by business and investment. Two, we need to make sure that we can look at such investment, particularly when we talk about critical infrastructure, through a national security lens, and assess investments through that lens, and reach appropriate decisions about what is beneficial not only to communities but to states as well. Three, of course, the environmental and social impact of these investments, and especially important when we talk about the extractive sector. And four, aligning with our climate change goals. And then fifth, last of all, I would say, of course, it comes down to private sector interest. And so unlike some states, we don't have the ability to direct investments. So we've got to make such opportunities profitable and attractive to the private sector. You know, and this is all a lot to consider, and it's why we think it's so important to take a comprehensive approach to the region, as we will articulate, as I'm sure the Secretary will articulate when he arrives in Reykjavik a few weeks from now. And so again, we look forward to that event, and thanks again for this invitation to join.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to say that we are now joined by our final panelist, Ms. Paula Isaac, Associate Deputy Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and also President, Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. Minister, the virtual floor is yours. And thank you for joining.
I'm very sorry about my technical problems. So thank you for inviting me, and I want to thank the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to join today. Minister Van Dahl was originally invited to this, and he sends his apologies. I know we have limited time, so let me just jump in. To ensure economic resilience and sustainability in the North, we need to listen, support, and build upon economic opportunities while ensuring that the people who work and live in northern regions are full participants, decision makers, and beneficiaries of this development today and for future generations. Canada's northern economies are dependent on natural resources, which is unlikely to change in the near term. This makes the economy subject to boom and bust, And so attempts are being made to diversify the economy in areas like fisheries and tourism, and ensure that Northerners and particularly Indigenous people participate fully in all economic opportunities. This is key if we are to address the socioeconomic gaps that still exist between Indigenous Northerners and other Canadians. In addition to strengthening Northern governance through the completion of land claim and self-government agreements, as well as completing the devolution of responsibilities and powers to the territories, this is a long-standing policy objective of the Government of Canada and is key to economic resilience. This puts decision-making and resources in the hands of Northerners. Building sustainable economies in the North is also inextricably linked to improving the social and educational outcomes for Northerners, particularly Indigenous people, as well as addressing key gaps such as infrastructure. All governments, and that includes federal, territorial, and Indigenous, have been making investments in these areas over the past decades, but much work remains. In addition, I would say that one of the most urgent issues facing Canada's North and its path to economic sustainability is the impact of climate change. This means a focus on adaptation is key, and particularly innovation in this area. The North has a lot to contribute on this front. Canada's overall policy approach to the North and to tackling many of the issues I just described is set out in our Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, which was launched in 2019. This represents a co-developed approach with provinces and territories and Indigenous governments and organizations to addressing challenges and opportunities in Canada's North. Implementation of this policy framework is underway, beginning with the co-development of governance structures. Let me talk for a minute about our relationship with other Arctic states. So Canada and its Arctic Council partners have a very good relationship, and we wholeheartedly support the Arctic Council and the excellent work it does. We've been working closely with Iceland in particular during its chairmanship and share many of the same objectives around sustainable economic development and social inclusion in the Arctic. I know that many Arctic states share the same challenges we have in Canada, and there are also many lessons to be learned and shared. In addition, I think there is likely more we can do to strengthen our economic relationship, be that by increasing trade or knowledge sharing. To close, our vision for the Arctic is a stable, rules-based region with clearly defined boundaries, dynamic economic growth and trade, vibrant northern communities, and healthy and productive ecosystems. Canada's North is defined by its people, and it is only by investing in people that this region will continue to grow and thrive. We understand that this can only be accomplished by working hand in hand with all Northern partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, very much, and thank you for working through our technical challenges. It's just a sign of the times. I would like to go then back to a note that Osha made reporting on the Iceland and Greenland report. Foreign Minister, we spoke last week at a different venue. We talked about the importance of the United States relationship with Iceland, but also with Greenland and other Arctic nations. And we talked about motives to build the report that you now have, the Greenland Iceland report. And we talked about the possibility of Secretary of State joining the Arctic Council in Iceland. OSHA highlighted the importance of international dialogue and avoiding vacuums in leadership. So I wonder if I could ask you to begin with, and then I'll ask everyone else, and then come back to the very issues you all raised. Can you please highlight for me, and I would ask each panelist briefly, can you just briefly highlight for me the importance of what it means to have the Secretary of State for the United States to actually come and engage at the Arctic Council at this moment in time, as the North continues to change dynamically in all realms?
Well, thank you. I think we can answer this question just to think about if he wouldn't have shown up or wouldn't show up. That would be a very, would you say, not a very good sign about the leadership of the US when it comes to both climate and especially when it comes to the Arctic. I think it would have been people would have been very disappointed. But and it's not, but it's of course he is coming, and that was no surprise to us. And I think the importance shows is that not only that he will be present, but also in the interest and from the new administration when it comes to both the Arctic and climate. There is no doubt about it that nothing is comparable with when we are talking about dealing with these big challenges in the Arctic. There is nothing comparable to the Arctic Council. So it's really important that that the US plays an important role there, and the first steps are something that we see as a very good one, and gives the intention of being really progressive and looking at this as it is, as an extremely important thing, which is Arctic issues. So I don't know which words are best to describe how important it is. It's just extremely important, and we are very pleased that not only he very early on we had the indication that he would show up, but also what he has said and done so far in the first days in office is something that we really value very much, and is something that will help us in the near and distant future. But because, like everyone has mentioned here, the importance of the Arctic cannot be underestimated.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister. I appreciate that. Minister Broberg, for you, the signaling coming from Washington, D.C. with the Secretary of State Blinken to the Arctic Council, what are your thoughts on that? What are your expectations?
Well, it's extremely important for us with the values that we share with the United States as well, to see that the United States and the Arctic, especially Greenland here, is not that far from each other. So for us, the value is mostly political in the first steps, but that lays all the foundation for all the necessary work we have to lay in the future. So for us, it's very, very important that the U.S., especially here with Blinken, is visiting Iceland on this very important trip. And I very much look forward to hear what he has to say with regards to the Arctic. As we all know, there are 5 Arctic states, and we are to be quite frankly now practicing to become one of them, as Greenland has aspirations in the future, as you all know. And for that matter, it's very important for us to already now start building the ties for the next step in our evolution, if you can call it that, for in our path on independence, as we clearly have been giving back in 2009. So for me and our country and our government, it's very important to see Secretary Blinken in Iceland as well, to see that he has the right priorities with regards to the Arctic.
Thank you very much. Coordinator DeHart, I would ask you the same, signaling from practically and both politically from the U.S. perspective, and then Minister Isaac, I'll come back to you as well, and then we'll move on to some questions from the audience.
Sure, thank you, Mike. Well, I think as decisions go, this was one of the easier ones, I think, for the Secretary to attend because of the importance of the region, the increased accessibility in the region, the contribution that the Arctic Council makes, even though it doesn't address security matters, the cooperation that takes place through the Council has an impact, I think, on keeping tensions low in the region. So, you know, for these reasons and many others, very, very important that the Secretary will be there. Through our history, I think we probably have not always given sort of that consistent attention to the region, but looking over the last 10 years, the growing attention in our system, I think there is no going back from sustained U.S. attention to the Arctic region. I think we have interests there that are recognized across the board now in our system, and recognized in a very bipartisan way, which I think is extremely important. Because, you know, this is a long-term effort. The Arctic won't open up overnight, per se, but it will open in the years and the decades ahead. So we need a policy and a strategy that's a bit more of a straight line. And I think all the conditions are set in our system for that to take place. So you're going to see this elevated interest continue.
Thank you, Jim. Minister Isaac, please.
Sorry, I'll just correct you. I'm deputy minister, not a minister. So
Deputy Minister Isaac, please.
So I won't say much. Others have said it. I think it's important that all member states engage. Certainly in Canada, we share a border with the US. We have very close relationships with Alaska in particular. I would say the Indigenous groups have very close relationships across that border as well. So those relationships are key, and we look forward to engagement from all member states as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow up on some other items that each of you brought up, and that is this issue of trade, not necessarily north-south, but also east-west. We have this arc of cooperation between the countries represented here, and we have an arc of cooperation. My question is related to infrastructure to support tourism and trade and shipping and all of the items that we mentioned here. What are your thoughts about how we not just lure capital north to make these infrastructure investments happen, but are there mechanisms to think about roads and ports and bridges in an east-west, west-east relationship? That is, can we think past borders to fund projects that are multinational, that
I think we lost him. Well, I hope that nobody cut him off because he started about cooperating cross-border, but I think I will just start since he seems to be temporarily off. We have a lot of interest in cross-border cooperation, as I said in my opening remarks. But the problem we have is we are the world's biggest island. We are literally an island. The same with Iceland, of course. But disregarding that part, we have always been cooperating, especially with Iceland, on communications and especially on infrastructure when you think of airports and air travel in general. So we are trying to do that with regards to infrastructure, but one of the things that Usher also mentioned, and also Mr. Thordarson, was that fiber optic cables and satellite networks and all that, they should be cross-border projects, so we can all benefit from them. And I know also Nunavut, Canada, would enjoy immensely of joining sea cables and stuff, fiber cables and infrastructure like that. I'm very sorry to just hijack the floor like this, but I think I will turn it over to Thordarson to elaborate on what I just did. Have fun.
Well, thank you. I thought this was well done. It's usually everyone sits and just waiting for something to happen, but you took the lead and well done. Yeah, I think that when we are discussing, and I think that most of us or all of us who live in the north are used to, we always talk about north and south, and we're just always looking south. We never, very seldom look north. And we haven't been looking east and west. And I think the short answer, we need to start looking east and west, because when you're preparing, for example, you mentioned cables, which is of course a very expensive equipment, but then you need to have the focus right, so to say. I think that, for example, now we are seeing, and the one reason we are really optimistic about that what we are preparing for and talking about when it comes to Iceland-Greenland connection is that we see a connection between Eimskip and Royal Arctic line when it comes to those cooperation. And it means that we have a transport, shipping transport, which is changes everything. But that, of course, wouldn't have happened except that there was some interest and enthusiasm between partners in Greenland and Iceland. And definitely when it comes to airports and flights, we haven't really materialized all these opportunities which are lay there. And now we are talking more because with the focus have been on Greenland and Iceland, but of course there's a lot of other opportunities. And for example, we do have, at least before COVID, pre-COVID, then we had direct flights between Alaska and Iceland, but we didn't really. I mean, there was not really much knowledge about it in Iceland. There's of course a lot of cooperations which could materialize between Iceland, Alaska, Canada, Greenland. And there's no doubt about that, and I can name other Arctic areas. So, but we need to explore these opportunities. We need to on the political side. We need to think. Mike, sorry, we lost you, so we just kept on going. Pelle took the lead, and he saved all of us. We were just sitting here and waiting for something to happen, and that was well done. But if you're not making strategies and plans, and if you're not sitting down with us in the Arctic, between our Arctic and see what can be done, then nothing's going to happen. And there's not that long ago, people finally start to talk about East and West when it comes to the Arctic. And I see that as the next big thing, is that we are thinking about East and West. I'm not saying that we shouldn't think about North and South, but East and West when it comes to the Arctic, when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to cooperation, that is the new thing, East and West.
Thank you, Foreign Minister. And Pele, thank you for jumping in there. I joke around that whenever this happens up here in Alaska, these are our planned disruptions to show that we need viable, redundant, reliable broadband connectivity throughout the North. It's not done purposely as a demonstration, but it simply shows that even the largest of Arctic cities, there are some challenges to be highlighted by elsewhere in the North that are not in places of larger population. So thank you all for carrying on without me. I assume that the conversation went on East-West relationships and investment. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to start taking some questions for the audience. I have about 2 pages of my own questions, but I want to take some questions from the audience. The question that comes up almost all the time is the following. Do you see reason to be concerned about foreign investment from outside the Arctic driven by political influence rather than profit? And do you see a need for new national or Arctic investment screening or information sharing process? I think, and there's some other questions as well. Are there concerns about Chinese investments in the Arctic? And as we look to draw capital north, what processes are there for screening and assuring that, as Coordinator DeHart noted, and also Deputy Minister that noted, that there's transparency and rules of engagement, legal frameworks are followed for investments? And I would just open that to any of our speakers here to answer.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. We always need to be aware when it comes to important infrastructure, how it's dealt with, and we need. Then I even though I'm very much pro free market and market economy and so on and so forth, then of course we would never, for example, see it as a good thing that one company would, for example, own all the roads, even in the US, and could toll it as it would like. No one would accept that. But at the same time, we also need to look at national security, and I think that how we approach this is that we, of course, do have certain values which we really want to preserve, which are things that we take for granted, as just human rights, democracy and rule of law. And it's really important that everyone who we are cooperating with are aware of these values. And then, of course, we also, with new technology, we do see some things, could see challenges that we didn't see before because we didn't have these technology. So that's the reason that we are making preparation when it comes to investment, especially in infrastructure, and screening when it comes to infrastructures and other things that are extremely important to us. And then secondly, and I know that me and Pele, we totally agree, because we are living in that kind of surrounding. We are very, very, very few. And our economy is, by all comparison, very, very small. What does it mean? I mean, I am very much in favor of foreign investment, and we are a very open society, Iceland, and we want foreign investment. But of course, it needs to be done in a way that we cannot be overly dependent on one, both not industry or owner or company. And that's something that we need to be aware of. But one other thing is that I also want to draw your attention to. It's really important that and we really welcome like-minded nations for an investment. That's something that we are trying to get the attention, the people who are sharing our values. And of course, we are cooperating with other partners, as has been mentioned here. And all of it, more or less, has been very successful. But that, of course, is always a different attitude when we do not share the same values. And that's something that we are working with, but then we need to be aware of that. We are never, ever going to give up these values that we find so valuable, and unfortunately, and that is a big worry. And for the changes which I have seen in my few years, maybe are many years compared to many other ministers, but almost now 5 years, we are not going in the right direction when it comes to the values that we feel are important in the world. And that is something that we take very, very seriously. But of course, having said that we want to, when it comes to cooperation, both trading, sustainability, fighting climate change, we of course work with everyone and try to do it in a way that everyone gains from it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister. We have about a minute left, so or about 2 minutes left. Why don't I ask you, the panelists, the same question, and if you have thoughts there, we'll follow up on that, and then we'll just do a quick closeout. Pele, please.
Yeah, to be first and foremost, we are outside of the EU, and we are also out of the North American part of the continent. So we are basically placed in the Arctic, outside all, I would say, known regulation that they have in the EU and the United States. But we welcome all investments, and as Mr. Thorason also said, we are few, but we are aware of the pitfalls. We have seen how other countries, well, basically we have experienced it ourselves. We welcomed foreign investments a couple hundred years ago, and all of a sudden we were a colony. So we have learned in Greenland of how to be wary, but we also know that we have to be kind of liberal on this thinking of attracting investments. So as long as people wanting to do business in the Arctic follow the rules and regulations we have in place, we welcome investments, and we do screen as well. So I would keep it short and back up what Minister Thorason also said.
Well, thank you very much, Pele, and thank you to this panel. I think that we could have gone on for a while. There's so much here to talk about, so much in common, and so many opportunities. It's clear there's lots of shared values, shared interest, challenges, but the opportunities ring true. So let me thank Mr. Foreign Minister, Minister Broberg, Coordinator DeHart and Deputy Minister Isaac for your time, your patience in working through all of the technical issues, but teasing out just the tip of the iceberg, pun intended, on these very, very important issues that we share between our countries. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to our next panel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Freyka and esteemed panelists. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce the Arctic Business Panel. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce first my friend and former neighbor from Nuuk, Greenland, Mr. Werner Hammiken, CEO of the Royal Arctic Line. Also from Greenland, Christian Kelsen, CEO of the Greenland Business Association. From Tromsø, Norway, Sten Gunnar Bonnevik, Executive Vice President of Troms Kraft. And finally, Curtis Shaw, President of the telecommunications company Northwestel. The company is based in Whitehorse in the territory of Yukon, Canada, but provides services for all 3 Arctic territories of Canada. I now welcome the moderator of the panel, Mads Quist Frederiksen, Director of the Arctic Economic Council.
Thank you very, very much. And I think this has been a great advertisement for the importance of connectivity. So I'm very happy to have all of you on board because it really shows a lot about the investments that are needed in the Arctic, not only with infrastructure that everyone talked about, but also digital connectivity. This panel will focus on the status and the outlook for the businesses in the Arctic. And as we heard about, there's not one Arctic. We are talking about several parts of the Arctic. And in this panel, we are covering everywhere from Yukon in the far west to Tromsø, where I'm sitting, in the east. I will jump straight into it because we are already a little bit behind schedule. But what the next speakers will do now is they will get a few minutes each, 3 to 5 minutes each, to speak about the status and the outlook, how they see the world from where they are sitting. Obviously, the pandemic is influencing everything, but also how connectivity and some of these mega trends and changes we are seeing will happen in the future. I think we will start from the west, and we'll move to Yukon, and a man who works with connectivity, Curtis Shaw, who is the president of Northwestel. So over to you. The screen is yours.
Thanks, Mads, and it's good to see everyone this morning. Really appreciate being here. My name is Curtis Shaw. I'm the president of Northwestel, and I'm based in the Yukon Territory in Canada. Northwestel is a telecommunications company that provides service across 4 million square kilometers of the Canadian Arctic. We have about 120,000 residents and 500 employees located in Canada's north. We provide service to 96 communities. We manage and support over 5,000 kilometers of fiber optic infrastructure and 61 satellite earth stations. In terms of connectivity and telecommunications, a few things that I'd like to highlight to kick the panel off today. The pandemic has highlighted the need for high quality, reliable broadband connectivity. Like many parts of the world, Northern Canada was faced with significant lockdowns, travel restrictions, mandatory isolation for residents that were traveling or returning home. And given location and the large distances between communities, broadband became absolutely critical for distance education, small business survival, social connection to the rest of the world, entertainment, and even delivering virtual healthcare to Northern residents. One of the things I would say is fiber networks have allowed us to scale up bandwidth very quickly. In the early days of the pandemic, if I think back to March or April of last year, we saw surges of over 50% week over week in the internet as students started to learn from home and employees were forced to work from home. This trend has dropped a little bit in the last few months, but we've sustained a much higher volume of internet traffic in 2021 than we did 12 or 18 months ago. I've had the opportunity to be part of the Arctic Economic Council's Connectivity Working Group. The committee has been chaired by Dr. Pam Lloyd from GCI in Alaska, And we'll be submitting our final report on Arctic broadband investments at the AEC General Meeting later this month. So excited to be able to deliver that report that we've worked on now for the last 2.5 years. Our report that we'll be delivering to the Arctic Economic Council highlights some considerations for broadband in the North. We're going to cover off why, what, and the how. So the why would be the economic and social reasons for investment. Why do we want to invest? And then the what is what types of investment, what types of technology, how do we accommodate technology to the Arctic landscape? And then the how was really a discussion model for Arctic investments and recommendations on how to leverage these investments to improve connectivity for residents. So what we've tried to do in the report is outline a number of case studies for private-public partnerships and development of broadband networks, and the importance of engaging with Indigenous communities in the early phases of any potential projects. Our report is very much centered around examples from the North American Arctic, so Alaska, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, but we believe some of our case studies and report findings are very relevant to other jurisdictions. Maybe the last thing I'll say about this report that's coming out is we've tried to build upon some of the other previous work that has been done, including the Wilson Center's database on infrastructure and the Arctic Investment Protocol. So we haven't started from scratch. We've really tried to build upon work that various committees and the Arctic Economic Council has worked on over the last few years. So in closing, I want to keep my remarks very short. Thank you for the opportunity to give these introductory comments, and I look forward to some panel discussion here in a few minutes. Thanks, Mads.
Thank you very much, Curtis. And that report that Curtis has mentioned and that matrix for how to do investments in connectivity will be public on the 20th of May on the AEC website as well. So now we will head east. We'll go to Nuuk, and we will hear about a company that we already heard a little bit about, Royal Arctic Line, that works with connectivity. Is in the nature of the company. And they work also with Iceland and with the US. So over to you, the CEO of Royal Arctic Line, Werner Hammerken.
Thank you, Mads. And I have to correct you, but you couldn't know. I'm right now in Ilulissat, and just to save you from looking at me alone, this is my view right now. First of all, I want to thank the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to represent Royal Arctic Line here and Greenland. I think I also should convey my thank you to Peter Askerson, my former neighbor, as he said, who is now in Canada, in Ottawa. And I hope you are good and well there, Peter. Yes, the past 5 years, we have spent a lot of effort in connecting Greenland with the rest of the world through improved network of maritime links. We now have a full year weekly service interconnected with Iceland, Faroe Islands, and also major port in Denmark, Aarhus, which gives us the opportunity to link Greenland much better with the rest of the world. It is probably equivalent to what Curtis would call getting on the internet. And with that, we are just sort of trying to look at how can we possibly stimulate growth in Greenland, and how can we build on this machine to develop something that takes Greenland to the next level. The truth is, the Arctic, or the Greenlandic Arctic in itself, is not particularly interesting from a traditional business perspective. It's small economies, it's isolated, it's remote locations, high infrastructure costs, low scale. And if you just take Greenland as an example, I mean, we're like 56,000 people, and we enjoy almost 40 square kilometers each of free land and ice. Whereas in France, you are 67 million people living on 1/4 of the space. So each person only has like 0.01 square kilometers of land. So the point with this is the Arctic is not a mass market, and that should be included in any business consideration. But no other place in the world offers the same opportunities for developing solutions for saving the planet. I think we heard a lot about sustainability today from all the speakers. And what makes the Arctic valuable now is the climate change. And with that, the new sea routes, aquatic biomass migration, and new access to minerals when the ice is retreating. It also makes the Arctic a geopolitical hotspot, obviously. But climate change creates a more critical need for data derived from the studies in the Arctic to understand which new resources are becoming available, and how does the climate work, and how fast is the clock really ticking. So another point in this small introduction is that scientific data is the new gold in the Arctic. We all know that space exploration gave the entire human race a lot of new technologies, and the Arctic can do the same. The old saying that the Arctic is changing and with it the world changes can now be replaced by, as the Arctic is changing, the world can learn from it. So the Arctic offers a unique platform for developing a future solutions for more sustainable societies. I think with a much smaller environmental footprint, and all sectors that deal with future solutions for provisioning of energy, heating, cooling, construction, agriculture, and fish harvesting and fish production can benefit from what we see happening here. Also, there's a lot of greenfield learning opportunities for more environmentally friendly solutions for the mining sector. We are completely open for mining, but responsible mining. And within the social and human sciences, many needs are derived from a strong desire to support indigenous people with solutions for education, for health, and for cultural bridging to the rest of the world. All that to be seen in the context of a desire to be more self-determined, as Pile Broberg also mentioned. So the fourth point here is that the Arctic offers opportunities to build a better world. What glues all this together is, of course, the improved connectivity, not only in the traditional sense with internet and all that, but also in the transportation sector. And we see huge investments made in airports. We have our own humble contribution to the maritime network connectivity. And I think the fifth point of this small introduction is to say that the Arctic, especially Greenland, is plugged in and ready to interact with the world. And of course, as businesses, we have responsibilities to seek sound development of our companies, employees, as well as the citizens we serve. But the Arctic offers opportunities to create a global impact with local actions for the benefit of the Arctic peoples. But if it's done in the right way, with a huge global potential for learning, which brings us back to, as the Arctic is changing, the world can learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very good remarks. And I think it fits very well into this panel that we have connectivity with education is an important part. You have renewable energy, you know, and we have a lot more energy than the rest of the world needs in the Arctic. So we can keep exporting that, and we can keep exporting raw materials. And as all the other speakers have said, collaboration is important. You also mentioned a lot of sectors. And now I will go south from where you are then. But we'll stay in Greenland. We'll go down to Nuuk, and I hope you sit there. I think I recognize that office. But the CEO of Greenland Business Association, Christian Kelsen, represents a lot of companies in Greenland, and companies that have to sell to international market as well, not only in Greenland. As Werner said, you know, it's only 56,000 people, so we have to trade with the whole world. So I'm looking forward to your remarks, Christian. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and correct, yes, I am in Nuuk looking after town while Werner is out of town. I'm from the Greenland Business Association. We are Greenland's biggest NGO, and we represent about 80% of the overall business turnover in the private sector. So we have about 325 members, and we're organized through industry and local committees. So we cover more or less all interests and all sectors in Greenland. Of relevance to today's topic is that we also sit on several international associations, including a membership to the Greenland and Icelandic Chamber of Commerce. So we sit on a lot of things, and we're part of most decision-making processes in Greenland. In terms of the sustainability and the outreach, I like to say that through our members, we reach out to about 7,000 employees, and if 7,000 employees in Greenland have a family of an average of 3 to 4 persons, we're somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 people that somehow have a connection through the workplaces in Greenland to the work that we're doing. Today, I promise to say a few words about the infrastructure and the options for doing business within our current and our coming structure. The current infrastructure I like to call Connectivity 1.0. It's very much based on structures that have been in place for more than 20 years and to some degree reflect a former societal structure. There's a lot of history in the way transportation to, from, and within Greenland has been done. And as Werner mentioned, we're heavily investing in upgrading the infrastructure to accommodate both the development in demographics, but also in the developing industries. As mentioned, for a little over a year now, we've had different opportunities when it comes to shipping routes to from Greenland. I'll focus on some of the other projects, as you just heard Royal Arctic Line talk about their project and their contribution. Mainly the airports. We're building new airports and runways in Nuuk, Ilulissat, and Raottok. On top of that, we're also investing in the fiber optic cables to enhance our internet connectivity. And in addition to all of this, there are investments made in sustainable energy solutions in Greenland, be both in towns and in smaller settlements. So our main gateways to Greenland have historically been Denmark and Iceland. The attempts to change this has often failed due to a lack of demand. But from 2023, we'll move on to what could be called the Connectivity 2.0. By then, I hope we have more volume coming in on the international shipping routes, and that our internet and phone links through the fiber optic cable to Newfoundland and Iceland have been expanded, giving us a stronger fiber optic network covering more of our domestic network in Greenland. Most visibly to the surrounding global community will be our new runways and airports that enable direct routing to and from overseas markets in both Europe and North America. Our infrastructure, whether it be by sea, air, or telecom, works on a so-called hub and spoke structure, enabling us to connect many destinations and towns through strong gateways. For our air transportation, the domestic gateway in Greenland has not been the most populated or demanded destinations, but ex-military air bases with strong operational capabilities, but no natural demand. With the new runways in Ilulissat and Nuuk, we're adding domestic gateways in Greenland in addition to the ones in Iceland and Denmark. And that gives us a more direct access to Greenland, and that will be a benefit to our development and trade with foreign countries. And we believe that demand can grow as much as 3 times the current demand over time when moving from an indirect routing to a more direct routing. So coming to Greenland and doing business with Greenland is possible today, but it often requires a lot of insight and patience. Through the new structures, Greenland will be more accessible to the world. Of interest to a lot of you could be what the main drivers are in Greenland for the demand. Obviously our construction, the fishing exports, our retail, and then hopefully over time mining and tourism. We have a very limited population, about 56,000 inhabitants. And the growth in that is more or less stagnated. So we are at a constant level currently. That also means that we eat the same amount of food and wear the same amount of clothes, etc. Most of our business in Greenland is for ourselves. Loosely translated from a Danish saying, we cut each other's hair. That's what we do. So our future strategies are based on export-giving opportunities, especially if we are to achieve more economic independence. Our primary source of affecting these drivers is through opening up to other markets and new businesses, be it in tourism or mining or something else that we haven't even thought of yet. We're expecting with the options made possible by the infrastructure, by the opening of the world, things will develop that we haven't seen or thought of. One of our main challenges, obviously, is the lack of a stable workforce. There is close to no unemployment in Greenland, and our businesses struggle in both developing a local workforce as well as importing labor from abroad. So I'm going to round off by linking back to some of the words that were said about tourism. Iceland has over the years invested heavily in marketing Iceland and Greenland as tourist destinations. And all the while Greenland has benefited from this, the campaigns and investments were mainly made by Icelandic companies. We saw a growing interest in the Arctic and Greenland through the campaign financed by Iceland Air and the Icelandic tourist boards. But the passengers came directly to Greenland on Air Greenland and other airlines. So I'm just trying to prove the point that there are some positive synergies, that if we market ourselves as a region, as the Arctic, it'll rain just a little bit on all of us. There are definitely synergies to be had. So I'll just conclude by saying that's not much we cannot offer in Greenland. And with the options offered by the development in the infrastructure, we are putting more weight behind the words. We are open for business. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I think it's great to hear all of you have been speaking about, the exporting part of the Arctic. And I think it's often forgotten in this whole discussion that 4 million people, they need to export to the rest of the world. Another thing you all mentioned has been the renewable energy. And therefore, we will move to the city where I'm sitting now in Tromsø. So the same latitude as where Berna is sitting. For those of you that don't know how high north Tromsø is, it is in the very high north of Norway. 10% of the Norwegian population lives in the Norwegian Arctic. And Stein Gunnar is the executive vice president of Tromskraft, electricity provider here in the Arctic, and very much of a renewable energy business. So over to you, Stein Gunnar. And you're mute, so you have to unmute. We'll just, I don't know if anyone else is able to unmute. We'll see. While Stein Gunnar is trying to unmute, it would be great if all of you can write in questions to the panelists. That also means that if we end up in the same situation as the previous panel, then and we don't have a paler, then everyone can just read the questions. Stein Gunnar, I don't know if we, or else you have to log out and log in again and allow for the sound to show. Curtis, if it's okay, I will ask you one of the questions from the panel, or from the audience. And the question is, and I'll read it up and I'll just elaborate for the people that don't know about LEOs. So how should we foster cooperation between existing Arctic telecom networks and existing or emerging LEO networks? And here, when they talk about LEO networks, they mean low Earth orbiting satellites, and there's very much this OneWeb that is also talked about in Nuuk in Greenland, and the SpaceX, these satellites that will provide internet connectivity. So maybe you could say, how are we going to link, the traditional connectivity in the Arctic with the LEOs? And then Stein Gunnar will try to unmute while you just answer that question.
Sure. Thanks, Mads. Northwest Tel, we're really interested in low Earth orbit satellite providers to help close the digital divide in communities where fiber networks are not feasible or just not cost effective in the near term. In my opening remarks, I really talked about fiber networks and the ability to scale up fiber networks. But for some of the communities we serve, it's just not realistic to bring fiber to all of them. So we've put support behind a vision to deliver 50 meg unlimited internet, 50 megabits per second unlimited internet to every home in Canada's north. And to do that in communities that aren't served by fiber in the near term, we've put our support behind what we call a community aggregation model. So we would put a series of larger LEO dishes in a community. And then from a household standpoint, really use last mile technology like fiber to the home, fixed wireless to connect up those homes and have local technicians able to install and support the community. We see this as the most reliable and scalable solution for northern residents by putting larger dishes in, aggregating it at a central location in the community, and then using traditional telecom technology to get to the end house. In terms of cooperation, I think through the Arctic Economic Council and other groups like this, sharing best practices around technology, sharing about what works. I know in the last few years, I've spent a lot of time with counterparts in the US and Alaska on how to deploy LEO for the benefit of northern residents. So I think there are venues like this and through the AEC that we can bring a number of telecommunications providers together to look at best practices to deploy LEO networks in Arctic countries.
Thank you very much. And I think is very much a place to focus on, and it's a place to look at because it seems to be the next step. I would like to ask Werner and Christian a bit follow up from the previous panel about, we're all talking about investments. But the question is always, we don't have unlimited amount of money. So where the investment should go. And now let's start with you, Werner. If you could invest in the Arctic, and I guess mostly about Greenland, but where should these investment go? And it looks like we have time going on, but I will let you answer the question, Werner.
Yeah.
About investments that you see. Where should we invest in the Arctic?
Yeah, there is a huge investment need across all sectors, Mads. Some of the things that we look at from a long future perspective, of course, is education and social welfare, housing, to create an environment where people can actually live in such a way that Greenland becomes an attractive place to live. So there's an abundant need for refurbishing the existing homes that we have all along the Greenlandic coast. So there's a lot of investment need there. There is also a need for investing in new things, as we talked about, as Christian mentioned. There are export areas that we haven't even figured out yet what should be. So to have funds available for trying out things and to venture into things that can create the export value for Greenland would certainly also be part of that portfolio if I was to manage that one.
Thank you. And before I hand over to Stein Gunnar, I will just ask Christian. One of the investments opportunities in Greenland that, like, if we really talk large scale, obviously housing and education are pretty large as well. But one is the Buxifjord on the power plant. Could you maybe just explain a little bit about the need for renewable energy in Greenland and for the companies, and how the energy resources, how is the current energy environment in Greenland for those that don't know about that part of the Arctic?
Well, you mentioned the Buxifjord power plant, which is a hydro plant close to Nuuk, and it was built 20 plus years ago. Fairly interesting. And back then we thought we had all the capacity that we would ever need in the world, and now we're actually running into having to add a third turbine, and unfortunately we'll be running out of water in the adjoining lakes within a reasonable number of years. But that project is interesting from the perspective that it's one of the first, and we're getting more and more hydro plants around the country, even in smaller towns and smaller settlements. And in addition to that as well, we're seeing solar panels projects popping up all over the country as well. And an interesting perspective is trying to find a financing model for these, and perhaps even involve our tourists in how to develop our infrastructure investments. So currently we are considering whether to set up a program where you as a tourist could pay into a fund when you would visit us, and that would go towards adding solar panels in the smaller settlements. They're fairly cheap, fairly easy to set up, and for our settlements and for our towns, it would make a huge difference if we could move away from the oil and other sources of energy and coal.
Thank you very much, and I think that's a super interesting perspective of solar panels being used in the Arctic. People from the south don't have a tendency to just see the dark areas for most time of the year. So I definitely think that's an interesting project. Now I will try to hand over to Stein Gunnar from Transkraft, who is, as I said, the executive vice president of an energy provider in the Arctic. So the floor is yours, Stein.
Thank you. Sorry about that. There should be a warning about not using an iPad, because obviously that didn't quite work. But now I'm on a PC. I'm actually in Oslo, and some trouble with connectivity here. So that I think that's good proof that it's not only in the Arctic where connectivity is an issue. So, but I live in Tromsø. I work for Transkraft, which is headquartered in Tromsø. We just entered into the Arctic Economic Council. I'll be very happy to serve on the board there and follow. And I look forward to getting to know all of you and getting to know the environment in which Arctic Economic Council operates in. Like you said, we're an energy provider. I'll try to be brief around that, but we provide about 1.2 terawatts per year, hydro and wind, and we're right now looking into hydrogen as well, as I believe the whole world is doing. We're owned by public entities, the city of Tromsø and the county of Troms. We're an old company, more than 100 years old. Always been there, and is an important part of the infrastructure of the society, of course. Northern Norway still continues with a strong growth. There are investments made, a lot of investments both in the public and the private sector. The private is dominated by fisheries and fish farming, and related to it also bioeconomy. There are a lot of investments going into energy and the energy transition, improving the grid, looking at hydrogen, both blue and green, establishment of new wind parks, and I believe we will have, Norway is a country that is sees itself at least as a leading power in terms of the green shift, and we need to make a lot of investments in the grid in order to be able to provide for all the industries that are now looking into how to change their basis of energy simply. Travel and tourism is also a big area in the north, and we'll still be investing heavily in that sector as well. The public investments are in roads and airports. I'd say education as well, defense and search and rescue. And there is also a continuation of the railroad question, or it's still a political question. The investment is of course huge in a landscape like ours, but at least the Labour Party just confirmed that they are in favor, which is an important signal, because a lot of people think that there is a good chance that the Labour Party and the coalition from the left will be taking over the offices after our general election in the fall. We'll see. We'll wait and see for that. But I'd still say that the railroad is far away into the future, if it ever comes, and if it ever should come. I think that's a good question to debate. But like all other places, I'd say probably across the Arctic, people is the big issue. I mean, we have jobs, we have the opportunities, as we all say, but there need to be people there in order to leverage from those opportunities, and that's a big issue here as well, and I think that needs to be solved, and that needs a lot of attention in the years to come. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think it's worth mentioning that Tromskraft is recently invested in a hydrogen project that is, is very much the future, not only for shipping and flying and everything, but the hydrogen technology will definitely change the Arctic as well in a positive way of exporting hydrogen to the rest of the region. We have 5 minutes left now. And I would like to know, the previous panels was full of policymakers, and there were a lot of mention of reports and a lot of good intentions, especially a lot of recommendations. And I'm like, yes, but it's not up to us in this panel to live up to these recommendations. It's actually up to the policy change. So I would be interested in just hearing from each one of you, and we'll start with you, Werner. If you could go to the politicians and say, this policy change would benefit the Arctic communities, would benefit the whole Arctic region, like it could both be for the people or for the businesses, what policy change would you ask for?
I think it has been mentioned also in the report that that facilitating trade is a key component of interacting more with the rest of the world. So I think that will remain the top priority for us to facilitate trade, either through trade agreements and also through internally in Greenland, if I speak for Greenland or as a Greenlandic, to safeguard that whatever supporting mechanism there is around trade, that could be within export, facilitation of export approvals and so on, that this could be brought back into Greenland's own jurisdiction. That I will see as very forthcoming when it comes to facilitating growth.
Perfect. Very, very specific, and I think they should just start with the trade agreements. Curtis, connectivity and so on in your field, where do you see is the biggest potential to change a policy and that will lead to further growth?
I'd say, Mads, that better coordination, communication from a government policy and funding perspective. Right now we're seeing a lot of interest in public broadband investments from different levels of government, from different government agencies. And I think coordination ensure that local communities, local residents see the maximum benefit, highest level of reliability, the best quality networks is really where we want to try to drive these funding groups towards. This can mean collaborating with a mine site to helping deliver services to a community that, it's putting two groups together. It could mean partnering with the government to use daytime government broadband traffic in a small community, repurpose that traffic for after hours entertainment for the residential market. So I think there's lots of opportunities here. We've always tried to start with what are the business objectives for the community? What are the local community residents saying? And then how do we achieve those objectives the best way by collaborating with different government agencies? So it comes down to coordination, communication of some of these programs.
Thank you. Especially when it comes to investments, there definitely needs to be some coordination so you don't waste money. Christian, we have 2 minutes left, and we also need to hear from Stein Gunnar. So one of the many policy changes from the Greenland Business Association catalog, which one would you pick?
Well, Stein Gunnar said it best, really. We need to invest in the people, both the people here and the future workforce that we need to import to support our own workforce. We need more hands on deck if we are to develop anything, because currently we're running at a maximum for the current activity. So if we are to create growth, more hands.
Put money in the education. And Stein Gunnar, what do we need? You mentioned railroads being built. You mentioned hydrogen projects. You mentioned all of these infrastructure development and tourism as well. What does it need for the Norwegian Arctic to develop further, or for the Arctic as a whole? What policy change would you add?
Well, to follow up on the people thing, I think maybe immigration regulations should be looked upon so that we can more easily move people internationally. I think that probably is a good way to start. But I'm tempted not to answer the question and say that well, yeah, policy change, yes, but I'd also like to see cultural change in the Arctic, saying that we need to lay our own plans. We need to come together and decide our own future and make viable, good plans, strong plans for this, and then invite policymakers on board and make this happen. We, at least in Norway, we have this north-south, and we have this tendency of sort of waiting what's coming or asking for things and sort of leaving our destiny in the hands of policymakers elsewhere. So I think that I follow all my colleagues here, but that we should also look to our own culture of being in this remote area and being a little bit dependent on central governments, and see how we can seek more political independence and autonomy and make these good plans that we can ourselves believe in and make others believe in, and then go from there. I'd really like to be part of such such a change, which is sort of a policy change. But
I think it's a good way. I think it's a very good way to end this, because you very much echo what everyone else says, you know, that we need free trade agreements or trade agreements across border. You know, we have to do that from the Arctic. Us living in the Arctic has to do this. It's very much about collaboration and coordination. We have to do that ourselves. We cannot point fingers at anyone else doing that only. We have to do it in coordination with other people, and then it's focusing on education and the future generations of the Arctic. And we have to take the seat. And with that, I will thank the whole panel. It was a quick panel, but I know you're all available if people want to get out in contact with you and do business with you. And the same is the Arctic Economic Council. So thank you very much, and thank you for the Iceland American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are only about 9 minutes over the posted agenda, which I think is pretty good considering the problems we've had with technology, which we apologize for. Now, the organizers have asked me to thank the Arctic Economic Council for organizing this panel, and I also want to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion. But now the time has come for the final input of the day, which belongs to Karl Guðmundsson, Director of Trade and Investment of Business Iceland, a public-private partnership established to lead the promotion and marketing of Iceland abroad. Please join me in welcoming Karl Guðmundsson for the closing remarks to this Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce conference. After Karl, I will come back with a few messages, but for now, Karl, the floor is yours.
Fellow guests, it has been a great pleasure to listen to the panels and speakers today. I've been asked to summarize briefly the discussions we had today here. We could say in summary, it has been a great inspiration, and we hope that all of you will take some inspiration from the increased collaboration in the Arctic. Well, we started by hearing from Einar Gunnarsson about Iceland's 2-year chairmanship in the Arctic Council, followed up with 2 very interesting talks from Árni Sigfússon and Össur Skarphéðinsson on the opportunities in the Arctic and Greenland specifically. And I highly encourage you to learn more about those reports, and I'm sure they will be distributed with links to those reports. In the first panel, we had the pleasure to listen to Ministers Þórðarson and Broberg with Hart and Isaac, and we heard them emphasize the collaboration between the Arctic nations and how important it is to have a sustainable economic development in the Arctic for the economic resilience of the area. We also heard about how the arc of cooperation and cross-border collaboration needs to extend from east to west, not only north and south. And we almost even had the pleasure of hearing people singing the song about Húsavík, which would have been a nice gesture, maybe next time. And in our second panel that just wrapped up, we dove deeper into the outlook in the Arctic with Mr. Hammeken, Shaw, Kelsen, and Bondevik. And they had a really good discussion on the importance of connectivity and infrastructure in terms of energy, tourism, shipping, and more. I was especially inspired to hear Mr. Hammeken talk about how the Arctic brings us an opportunity to learn about how we can build a better world. The Arctic will soon see constant daylight, and we should all be very optimistic about the prospects of the Arctic region. And I hope this conversation will serve as a small step towards that bright future. So I thank you very much from Reykjavik, Iceland, and wish you the best. Thank you very much.
Well, we have come to the end of this conference, and the organizers would like to thank everyone, the contributors, the speakers, the panelists, the moderators, and of course the sponsors of this event. Thank you all for joining, and hope you feel that these 2 hours were time well spent. And remember that we will stay online for the attendee networking, and I encourage you to make use of that. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.